is this, just to recap, is a session for ECR colleagues organised through BELMAS and specifically the CEPaLS RIG, Critical Education Policy and Leadership Studies. It just so happens that Paul and I are both editors-in-chief of different Q1 journals. And so we thought that it would be a good use of our time to come together and think about this, share some of what we know through a CEPaLS and BELMAS lens. So the way that this is going to work is Paul has some slides specifically about getting published in his journal, Management and Education. I have some relating to critical studies and education. We'll both present those for 15-ish minutes each, maybe a bit less. And then the rest of the time we'll open up to questions, because obviously you're all in different positions. Some of you may well have published something or a lot, who knows. Some of you may not have published anything at all. And so your needs are all slightly different. So before we do that, actually, should we just try and get a sense of where we're at and the stage that we're at in our publishing journeys? You can do this through the chat or whatever. Perhaps if you just say how many publications you have had up to this point.
Too many.
Too many. Yeah, Peter, we're not expecting you to count. This is useful knowledge because, yes, we've got slides on things that will interest those particularly who have not published anything yet.
Hello.
Excellent. Thank you, colleagues. This is really useful.
Super. So just occurred to me that I've not introduced ourselves. So I'll introduce myself and then hand over to Paul, who will introduce himself and then start on his presentation. So I'm Steve Courtney. I am Professor of Education, Sociology of Education Leadership at the University of Manchester, and also a BELMAS trustee. And I co-convene with Denise Origi, who's in here somewhere, the CEPaLS RIG. I'm very happy to be with you all today.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'm Dr. Paul Armstrong. I'm a reader in education, also at the University of Manchester, a colleague of Steve's. I'm also the editor-in-chief of one of the BELMAS journals, Management in Education, which is the sister journal to Educational Management, Administration and Leadership, which is edited by Tony Bush. And I'm also a trustee of BELMAS as well. And yeah, really happy to be here today to share with you some of our information, I suppose, around publishing, certainly aimed at early career colleagues and scholars and researchers. As Steve said, I've got some slides here which I'm just about to share, so just bear with me while I remember how to do this. Hopefully this will work. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Steve. Okay, let's make that full screen. Okay, so that's our journal. And I think it was first published in 1987. So we're celebrating our 40th anniversary next year, which we're looking forward to. So it's a well-established journal, but it's had an interesting kind of trajectory, really, because it started out as a sort of professional journal for teachers, I suppose, back in the late 80s. I won't go on too much about the history of the journal now, but just to say that it's changed quite a bit in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, certainly since I've taken over as editor-in-chief. And we publish far fewer of those practitioner-focused pieces now. We're much more academically focused, which I think explains why we're now in Q1 and part of that group of sort of leading journals in the field of educational leadership management and administration, alongside other journals like Email, for example. What do we publish? Well, again, this is something that we've been working on over the last few years to try to sort of tighten up that focus, and we have made some changes to MIE because of that. But generally speaking, we publish on any aspect of education management and leadership. We are owned by the British Education Leadership Administration, the Management Administration Society, BELMAS. You'll all be aware of them. That's why you're here today. And so, of course, our journal aligns with their focus. So we have a kind of strong focus on education management, on leadership, and then because of that, we kind of have published pieces that are linked to sort of policy and practice as well. But all that we do request and all that we ask, I suppose, is that there is a strong focus on leadership and management in the submission. If that isn't there, articles tend to get desk rejected just on the basis that they're out of the scope of the journal. But we certainly welcome contributions from new and established and international authors and practitioners as well. And we have a full range of colleagues who publish in our journal in that respect, from those who are more experienced to those who perhaps are taking their first steps into publishing, which some of you here on the call today would fall into that particular category. We mainly publish academic articles, but we do also publish opinion pieces. We have got a new practitioner piece called Voices in Action, which we've just launched recently. And we still publish book reviews as well. So we're a little bit different to some of the more established journals in the field, and you'll see the difference when Steve introduces his journal afterwards, in that we do offer these alternative features. So while most of our copy, I would say, most of our content is academic articles, we do have these other options to publish shorter format pieces, which are still reviewed by 2 sub-editors, but not through that anonymous peer review process that the academic articles are. The other thing to mention is that we, up until very, very recently, our word limit was 4,000 words. And again, that was what made our journal quite distinctive in the field, actually, because we publish shorter format academic pieces. Due to the sort of demands of the market, I suppose, and the number of submissions that our sister journal, the EMAL, is getting, and the popularity of the journal, we've taken a decision to increase our word count to 8,000 words now. So we are now publishing longer format academic papers in MIE. That's a departure from our historical approach. Okay. So I'm the editor-in-chief, and I usually get wheeled out to do these kind of things. But actually, there's a whole team of wonderful colleagues who do just as much work as I do on the journal, and who it would be remiss of me not to mention here. Certainly the sub-editors who take care of the different features of the journal, who are all listed there. And a particular mention to Dr. B. Hughes, another colleague at the University of Manchester, who does a wonderful job as a deputy editor of the journal. And we also have a dedicated international editorial board as well. And you can see all of those colleagues on the webpage if you're interested. Okay. But as with many busy journals, I suppose, it's just to say that this is a lot of the work that goes on in the background is done by big teams of colleagues, academics, and of course all our reviewers as well, who give their time freely to support the functioning of the journal. That's really sort of important to acknowledge. These are the statistics which we know are important for lots of different reasons. They're important for us for a number of reasons, really, but that impact factor that's put us back into the top quartile of journals has had quite an influence on the journal over the last 2 to 3 years since we've been back in Q1, because of course the journal's become a lot more popular, and you can see there that last year we saw an increase of 78% in terms of our submissions on the previous year. We're expecting a similar increase this year as well. So the journal's popularity has increased significantly as our impact factor has gone up, because of course the universities and organisations that we all work for as academics expect us increasingly, and internationally this is not just in the UK, increasingly expect us to publish in high-ranking journals in order for their own ranking statistics and of course for your own promotional potential as well. So these statistics, whatever you think of them, and I'm sure we've all got different views on them, and and they're certainly not perfect, and they certainly don't tell the whole story of a journal, but they are very important in that respect. What I would say about this is that as the journal's got increased in popularity, we do end up rejecting a lot more articles than we used to do, because we get lots of speculative submissions now that we never used to have before. Because the minute your journal's categorized as high ranking, then you end up with lots of people wanting to publish there, regardless of whether or not their work is actually situated within the field of educational leadership and management. So a lot of that number of articles that you can see there in that first bullet point will get rejected, by myself as the editor, because the submission does not fit the scope. So that's something to bear in mind for potential authors, and I'll come on to that in a second. But why does journal publishing matter for early career researchers? Well, the first thing to say is that your work, your research, your thinking, your writing will reach a much wider audience than your thesis. I noticed a couple of you said that you completed your doctorates recently, and congratulations on that. It's the first, and in many ways the most important step in your academic career. But it is the first step, and it's just the beginning. Actually, it might not feel like that after 3, 4, 5 years of solitary confinement, writing up your PhD, and it's a tough gig, but actually it's just the first step. And in order for your work to reach a much wider audience than your thesis, publishing is really, really important in respect of that, of getting your research out there into the public domain, so that it can have impact and influence, whether that's on knowledge production, or whether that's impact on research or policy or practice. All those things matter, but they can't really happen unless you publish, unless your work is out there in the public domain. Okay, and because of that, you have an obligation to disseminate your research, ethically, morally. That's part of the commitment that you make when you're designing a research project, and certainly if you're getting funding for that from an external funder, you are obliged to disseminate your research. And as I said before, you'll be expected to do that from your organisations. Publishing your research means that it's accessible via all the major search engines. Okay, and certainly, that's really important if you want your work to be out there and out into the public domain, and for people to read it and to cite it. Those things are really important. As are university careers and academic reputations, they depend very much on publications. And some of that's to do with rankings and Google Scholar citations and that sort of stuff. But it's also about being known in the field and your work being known. Part of that's really, really important. And again, that cannot happen unless you publish your research. Okay. And then, of course, our organisations depend very much on their rankings by the number of publications and citations that we have as individuals. That collective information goes into the sort of rankings of our different departments and subjects and universities as well. So all of these things are connected, and they're all important for slightly different reasons. Okay. So just a couple of general points here, and this is not necessarily specific to MIE, but there are some connections here. You do need to choose a journal linked to your title, your abstract, and keywords. Okay, so this links back to what I said before. This might sound obvious, but we receive many submissions that are unconnected to leadership or management. I'm sure Steve does as well. His journal, unconnected to the scope of the journal. These things are really important. So do select your journal wisely and carefully, and think carefully about where you want to publish and how that your work aligns with the focus of that particular journal. Do be careful about open access author page journals. Okay, the motive for these is often profit over quality, and most of the high ranking journals in the field, including management and education, including email, including CSE, are funded by subscriptions, and there is no charge for publication. So my recommendation, my advice would be to avoid paid publications wherever at all costs. Actually, in my view, it's not something that's worth getting involved with. And you do have to be very, very careful about publishing scams. We've seen authors paid for papers that have been accepted by journals when they've never even been received by the journal. So if in doubt, do check with the editor. Okay. The other thing to do is to think about ambitious to be as well. Now, if you're an early career researcher and you've not published before, or you're relatively inexperienced at publishing, it might be nice to publish in a really high ranking journal, but very good journals have low acceptance rates. So sometimes you might have to be realistic and say, okay, well, if I do get rejected for CSE or email or MIE, it's not the end of the world. It's not a reason to give up. But you might just need to bear in mind those journals and those acceptance rates and just be realistic, particularly at the very beginning of your career. First-time authors might consider submitting to less prestigious but still good journals. There's some great journals in Q2, for example, or co-authoring with more experienced academics. That's another way that you can think about developing your writing at that early career stage. Writing with somebody else who's published before, who can help you with your writing, help you to develop, and that can be a good way to take your first steps into the sort of publishing space. Okay. Some more general advice, really. Do read the journal submission guidelines. Okay, I can't emphasize this enough. And in particular, do look for the journal's descriptions, its aims, its scope. Is the journal right for your article? Okay, there are lots and lots of journals out there, lots of very good journals. There'll always be 2 or 3 alternatives to the one that you're looking at. So do take a look at that. You might want to look back at some of the papers that have been published in that journal. Have you cited any of that work in your own work? That's often an indication as to whether or not your article is right for that particular journal. If you've not cited any of any previous work that's been published in that journal, it might be that you need to redevelop some of the writing in there, or you might need to look elsewhere. So bear that in mind. Okay. Think about the word limits. Okay. Editors like myself and Steve receive hundreds of submissions a year. Okay. And we have to screen them all and look through them all. And that's a lot of work. So if your word limit is over, you're just giving the editor straight away permission to say, okay, well, I can be rejected on the basis of that. So do take that seriously. These are not sort of general these are quite fixed guidance. If you're over the word limit, it's very unlikely that your article is going to get accepted at that point. Okay, make sure you've sought all the permissions and checked all the boxes in relation to originality. Okay, it needs to be your own work. Things like formatting are really important, and referencing requirements. All journals have slightly different guidelines and slightly different requirements in that respect. So do take care to get that sort of stuff right. And there are lots of great program software out there that can do a lot of this for you now. So there's no real excuse for you to be getting this sort of stuff wrong. And you don't want that to be the reason why your article has been rejected. Okay. It's always worth asking a colleague or a supervisor or a senior colleague for feedback on a draft as well. Just to get somebody who's published before, or somebody in your research group or your organization, second pair of eyes on that, particularly if you've written this on your own. It's always helpful to get somebody to do that before you submit that. There may well be things in there that you've sort of overlooked, which we all do from time to time. So that was some advice I was given when I first started writing, and it served me well. And for those of you that are just starting out, that have just finished your thesis, don't underestimate the work required to turn a chapter or an assignment into a publishable article or a book chapter. Okay, your thesis and your PhD has been written for a very particular audience and for a particular purpose. And unless you've undertaken your PhD in sort of journal format, which I know is becoming increasingly popular in some organizations, unless you've done that, it's unlikely that your work is going to be publishable in its thesis form. Okay, so you need to think carefully about how you redevelop and rework anything from your PhD into a publishable article or a book chapter. It won't be sufficient to just cut and paste the work. And do expect to make major or minor corrections as well. Do not be discouraged by this. Okay, if you get asked to make corrections, then you should celebrate. That's a win, because you've been given basically a list of tasks that you need to complete in order to get that work published. Okay, so don't be discouraged by that. The vast majority of articles that are submitted to our journal have major corrections or are rejected. Some get minor. it's very rare that we see an article that's accepted first time. And I think I spoke to Tony Bush about this. I think they get something like 1,000 articles a year, and he's been journal editor for 20 years. And I think he told me that he can remember 2 articles in all that time that were accepted without any corrections. So don't expect that to be the case. Okay. Just some do's and don'ts for getting published then. We've mentioned some of these already about being explicit about how your article uses an approach aligned with the journal. Okay, so do think about that. And I think Steve's example will be helpful shortly to explain that in a bit more detail. Make sure you're using a theoretical or conceptual framework or some tools to think with and against the sort of ideas and the arguments that you're making. Okay, so it's not just a research report or a descriptive piece. Okay, if you want your article to be published, your work to be published in a high-end journal, there needs to be that theoretical or conceptual underpinning to the work. And certainly you need to identify what your contribution is as well. Often I desk reject articles that look good to me, but the contribution hasn't been outlined, and I can just say to the author, look, you need to explain to me how your work is going to contribute to the field and move the field forward, and then I can send it out to review. Okay, so do be explicit about that. Don't just assume that the reader will understand what the contribution is from the content. Okay, you need to be explicit. And in that sense, you need to state how it speaks to and advances the field internationally. Okay, use a title that is findable in online searches. Okay, that's really, really important, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a second of my final slide. And write clearly and accessibly as well. Okay, make sure there's clarity in terms of your writing. Readers need to be able to understand what you've written. Bearing those things in mind, don't ignore the journal's aims and scope. Okay, again, you're just asking to be rejected there. Same with the word limit. Same with that structure. Okay, look at the style, look what the journal's requiring. Don't forget to locate your contribution in the current scholarly conversations within the journal and within that field again. So locate it within the work that's been published in that journal. That's really important. Journal editors know their journals well, and so do their reviewers. And if you've not located your work within the work that's been published in that particular journal, that publication, you'll find that you're going to struggle to get it published. Okay. And don't neglect the abstract as well. This is really, really important. Okay, so your abstract is important in terms of explaining and summarizing what the paper's about, where the data was generated from, if that's relevant, and most importantly, what the contribution is as well. Okay. The thing about abstracts, I suppose, is that for editors, this is the first thing we see. Okay, it's the first thing we read, and we'll often base our initial decisions on the titles and the abstracts. Okay, and equally, abstracts go to referees and may influence their willingness to review. So it's important that your abstract isn't just an afterthought. Pay close attention to it, and take a look at the structure and the guidelines. Each journal will ask for a slightly different way of structuring and writing your abstract. Some journals expect structured abstracts, and we don't in MIE, but some do. But certainly, you need to be outlining your aims, your literature, the method, the data generation, and the conclusion as well. Okay, and again, keep an eye on the word count for that. And then just a quick note on title. Then I'll pass over to Steve. Titles are very important, and they do require careful planning and thought. The main thing is that they are reflecting the area of the field that you want to be associated with, that you want to make a contribution to. Okay, so they need to reflect the contents of the work, but there'll be keywords in there that I think really, really important that you need to make sure that are in there in the title, because they help discoverability through search engines. And what that means is that your work is more likely to be found by colleagues searching for particular areas of the field, and then it will get cited. Okay, so do not neglect the title. The title is really important. And again, if you've got any questions about that, seek advice from a senior colleague. They'll be able to help you with that. Okay, I'll pause there, Steve, because I'm aware I've gone over time a little bit, and I think it'd be helpful to get the view from CSE. So I shall stop sharing at this point.
Lovely, thank you. Right, I just need to warn you that while Paul was speaking, my computer was occasionally freezing. Everything went dead except for my video. If that happens again, I won't even be able to tell you. I'll just be going at the screen, at which point I'll restart it and Paul can take over. So while the going is good, let's go. Okay. Now, Paul's done a lot of the general things, and so I'll be able to flick over quite a lot of this, I imagine. I'm editor-in-chief of the journal Critical Studies in Education, along with Professor Glenn Savage of the University of Melbourne. We've been enrolled since 2022, when we took over from Trevor Gale, who had been in charge for many years. Oh, come on. Something is really not happy, is it? Let's try that again. Right, it's not happy, so I'm not going to attempt that. Now, CSE is relatively unusual because it is a journal that has a political mission. It's a political mission with a small p. Now, I'm going to try and generalize this. I can talk about what that political mission is, but unless you're going to publish there, then it's not that interesting to you. The generalizable takeaway is that all journals have an angle, all journals have a readership, all journals are engaged in scholarly conversations and are not engaged in others. All journals are sites for epistemic and other sorts of scholarly communities. So it's when you're choosing a journal, the question is not just, does this particular article fit? But it's also, are these my people? Am I trying to reach the readers of this journal? Are these the people that I would like to have in my networks? For CSE, we're quite clear. What unites us is not a focus on any particular subject area, because that's quite broad. It's the critical sociology of education, understood broadly. We are united by our approach, which is critical. And by that, we mean we have an onto-epistemological approach grounded in social constructionism and a concern with how power relations associated with the reproduction or disruption of disadvantage through educational processes might be described, explained, and their effects illuminated. At the moment, that tends to mean that the lenses include things like gender, sex, race, well, less sex and more gender, class, poverty, race, ethnicity, and so on. But we're keen not to refract the social world through these categories only. These are constructs like everything else. And so we're interested in work that pushes at the boundaries of all constructs, including these. So, if you try to publish with us and you do not have an explicit theoretical framework, and even better, if you are not trying to make an original contribution to theory, then you are not going to be successful, I am afraid. That's one of our non-negotiables. So we do not believe that the social world speaks for itself, and therefore that's why theorization is important to us. As I say, we understand education very broadly, not just in terms of the phases of education, but formal, informal. We are very open to what it says here, traditional and or innovative methods. It's actually quite unusual to see quantitative data expressed in a critical research paradigm. We believe that it can be done, and we are very open to seeing it. We have an expert on our editorial board, but it tends to be that quantitative data often express an underlying positivism, and it's that we reject. So if any of you can find a way to express social constructionism or constructivism, these are different, or a similar epistemology through quantitative data, then be our guest. We'd love to hear from you. But the key thing is that we reject positivism. And so that means that we do not believe that there is an external social reality, and by external, I mean external to the researcher, that is out there waiting to be found. And that therefore, the job of research is to capture this external reality and report on it. And you can perhaps intervene on that social reality through certain research instruments and through conceptualizing that reality as variables that you can tweak as a researcher. And a lot of leadership studies do that, of course. We hold that researchers are an integral part of the social reality that they're investigating and help to co-construct that reality. So you can't use language in submissions to us that imply that there is this epistemological distance. Therefore, we won't have findings, I'm afraid, because the word findings implies that those conclusions were like apples on a tree, pre-existing the researcher walking underneath and picking them off. That's not what happens. The insights and conclusions from your data do not exist before the researcher comes along and co-constructs them. It's a conversation, it's a dialogue with the data. So that means as well that we reject the word findings for the same reason as data collection. We don't believe that themes can emerge. We don't believe that insights are revealed. And we definitely don't have data extracts speaking for themselves. And so that makes us a bit wary of studies that claim to give voice to participants. That's it's just a different research tradition. That's humanistic research. And that's fine, but it's not us. So the point is, we're not saying what's right and wrong. We're saying what's right and wrong for our journal. That means that we prefer articles that use subheadings that advance the paper's substantive argument. Therefore, we wouldn't have a section that says methodology. We definitely wouldn't have one that says findings, but even if you change the word findings to analysis, we still wouldn't have that. We would like you to use subheadings that advance the argument. Now, this could be very helpful actually to authors as they write, because it forces them to think about what their argument is. And so each section needs to contribute to its construction and development. We have recently raised the word limit to 9,000 words for publishing reasons, which I won't bore you with. Abstracts are often really bad, I've found. People are rarely super at writing abstracts. I can recommend that you go to Pat Thompson's work on mini texts to see what details about your article need to be captured in an abstract. But increasingly, with these things being indexed digitally, as Paul rightly said, there needs to be a high congruence between the title, the words that appear in the title, the words that appear in the abstract, the words that are featured in the keywords, and then what you then go on to write. And so that, I would say, is a general takeaway for any journal that you submit to. Just a little bit more about us. We've been a Q1 journal for many years. Metrics go up and down. You know, I mean, I note that Discourse and JEP and BJSE have just been through a period where their metrics were quite down in relation to their historical performance. And certainly for some, if not most of those journals, they're on the way back up now. It is therefore tempting to put a lot of emphasis on metrics, but equally I would attempt to reject that impulse. We're not always in control of everything to do with our metrics. What you can say, though, is that Paul's right when he says, look at acceptance rate. It doesn't mean don't go for a journal that's got a tiny acceptance rate. It just means be realistic. You know, if you end up being one of the 90% that's rejected, then as you'll have deduced from what I've been saying earlier, it's probably not about your article being good or bad. It's about your article fitting. We've actually got, and I don't know whether this is the same for Sage, but Taylor and Francis, where we publish, has got two versions of reject, and the author doesn't see which one you've got. It's for an internal use, really. But one is reject manuscript is unsuitable, and one is reject manuscript is unsound. And 98% of our rejects are unsuitable, 98%. So, I mean, it's hard not to take it personally, but that is the context. So here is a version of the slide that you saw from Paul that speaks directly to CSE. You will need to be explicit about how your article uses a critical approach, and you can define that as you want. What critical is a conversation rather than a definition. You do need to use a theoretical framework or thinking tools to think with and against. You need to identify your contribution. Lots of authors write what they're going to do in the article and don't say necessarily what those will contribute. Now, there's no real mystery about this, but it's surprising how few do it properly. Your statement of contribution needs to summarize what the state of the art knowledge is in the particular scholarly conversation to which you're contributing. And then you need to say what your article will do that takes that knowledge forwards. It's that simple and it's that hard. So it's no good just saying, for example, the research that I present here will add to knowledge on X. We don't want additive, we want precision. What exactly is being added and why does that matter? You can add anything to anything, but it doesn't mean to say that the world is a better place for its having been added. So all of that requires precision and a justification. And I think I've kind of said the rest on that. And so this is who we are at the moment. We've just undergone quite a big change in our editorial board composition and taken on a lot of early career researchers, actually. So we're just about to induct them. There's a few here from Manchester, which is marvellous. And this is part of our commitment to ECRs. It is hard to get into CSE, but equally, we've always given early career researchers particular attention because, you know, when you submit to us, we spot you. We're also quite unusual. Let me just finish on this. Our editorial summary is substantive and substantial. Some journals simply collate the reviews and press send. We don't do that. We intervene editorially. And so sometimes it looks as if the editorial comments at the bottom of your 2 or 3 reviews are actually a third reviewer, and that can be the case. And if you get through 1 or 2 resubmissions, then by that point, we're not sending it back out to review at all. You're just in a conversation with the editor, who will by then have assimilated all of the critiques and recommendations from the reviewers and is honing your article with you. But we ask that because reviewers obviously don't necessarily understand the particular onto-epistemological stance of our journal and might, for example, ask for something that is contraindicated by our mission. And so we need to be quite interventionist in order to keep that on track. If someone's calling for more detail in the methodology and we disagree, then we'll intervene and say, disregard that sentence, for example. So editors for us do a lot of work, actually. They do. But it must be said as well that people who submit to us get a really good deal, even if they're rejected. They often get really deep and engaged and expert feedback. Even if they're desk rejected, the editor will have written a decent summary, unless they're well out of scope. So that is all I'll say there. We've now got then around 20 minutes to open the floor for your particular questions and comments. Each of you is in a singular place in your publishing trajectory. I know that a lot of you actually haven't published yet. So, some of the things that we have to say in terms of just the mechanics of resubmitting might be useful to you. Paul mentioned the expectation of revising and not to be shocked by that. Let me just add to that. It can be not just daunting. For some, it's actually impeding to get a big old list of revisions to do. I know one ECR who essentially never published another journal article after his experiences of getting, I mean, he understood it as rejections and they weren't, as Paul said. It was a long list of things to do, but he was quite emotionally overwhelmed by that and just never resubmitted it. If you want to be in this game, you can't be like that, I'm afraid. You just can't. I will observe this. What you get back, even if it's bad, is always worse when you first look at it. So read it, go away, have a cup of tea, have a rant, and then actually put it down for a week. Because when you come back to it and read the same words the following week, it already looks completely different. Honestly, I can't tell you how often that happens. Things that looked the first time as if they were asking you to generate more data and rewrite everything suddenly look doable. So I would always recommend that you do that. Take that breath. Take a week. The other thing is when you respond, construct a table. Column 1, what the reviewer said, break it all down so that each single revision is there. And, if you want to give yourself a fun task, then put some of the praise that you got in there as well. And then in column 2, be specific about how you've responded. And I mean, be specific. Nothing winds editors up more than seeing people just say, oh yeah, I did this somehow, but you've got to guess how. No. If you've added words, then copy and paste the words that you've inserted into the text. Also, remove all snark from those responses. I mean, I'm terrible for this. I can never send the first draft of anything because in my column 2, I'm about 98% snark. Even if it's clear that the recommendation was not made in good faith, or the reviewer was an idiot who doesn't understand your part of the field, or whatever, always respond as if they did write as an expert and in good faith, and keep that tone, and that's very much more likely to go down well. And it also help you as well. The response written in snark is just not going to be as good. It's just not. I think that's all I need to say on that. So yes, I will now shut up and open the floor.
We did have a question from Caitlin, Steve, in the chat, which I've answered, but I don't know if you've got any further responses to that.
Yes. Now there are thesis. Thank you, Paul. I agree with all of that. I would add only that there are thesis chapters and thesis chapters. Bearing in mind that when you write a doctoral thesis, overall it has to make a contribution to knowledge. There is no guarantee that that contribution will be located in any single chapter. This is somewhat an advantage of journal format theses because they are structured so that each chapter does make a contribution because it's intended to be a journal article. But let's assume that you've written a monograph. You've got to think, what is it about this chapter that contains a contribution to the scholarly conversation that I'm locating my work in? If it doesn't, if the contribution is kind of more diffuse over the analysis chapters as a whole, then you're going to have to make sure that they're shifted into that chapter, or you bolster whatever's in there so that it is substantive in its own right.
So
Samantha.
One substantive theme is what I'm hearing there, Stephen.
Say one thing well rather than try a load of things. Yeah. The best articles, try to do a thing, do it well, get in, get out.
Awesome. Thank you both, Stephen and Paul.
Pleasure. I think Samantha had a hand up, Steve, and then we've got another question from Stephanie in the chat. Samantha, do you want to go first?
Yes, are you? All it is, obviously, I don't start my PhD until later this year, and suffer with really bad imposter syndrome, as I'm sure quite a lot of people do. When would you recommend going into kind of doing something like this? If you had a really good idea, kind of now based on research that you've done as part of your master's degree, would you recommend you waited until you were kind of embedded in a PhD, or?
If your PhD is in the same substantive area, then I would wait.
Right.
I've seen a few of my PhD students who did amazing master's dissertations and did write from it, but it's kind of clear that the work they did as they developed their thinking for their PhD was just better, deeper, and so on. If you're doing it in a different area, then fill your boots. My master's was in a different area to my PhD, and I published from my master's.
Yeah.
I mean, incidentally, I still think that it was nowhere near as good as the stuff that I would have done later. So there's still an argument for saying the doctoral journey is one that profoundly changes how you think, and that your work will be better for having undertaken that journey.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you.
Stephanie, I'm concerned about relevance of my article by the time it's published. My thesis was linked to government policy, which has already changed. Right, well, don't make the article about the fact of the policy then. Make the article about the fact of the change. The policy situation being in flux can be an object of analysis. I mean, this happens to nearly all of us. Nearly all of us do. It's especially true of a PhD. PhDs go on for so many years that often the thing is entirely changed. I've got a part-time PhD student right now who was looking at T levels, and by the time when she started, they were just being introduced, and so her research participant group was people who were on board for the first tranche that were being released. Now, because she's part-time, because she's taken interruptions through maternity and so on, there's a fair chance that T levels will be abolished entirely by the time that she submits. Now, we are not in the slightest bit concerned about this because we are orienting her focus on the fact of flux rather than on this policy is the solution, will it be?
Yeah, and there's always a lag, I think, with any kind of academic publishing, just because of the nature of the whole publishing process, the whole machine. It just takes a bit of time to generate data. It takes time to get your ideas organized, and some colleagues are more efficient than others in that respect. But generally speaking, the time between data generation and a kind of project taking place and then published work that comes out of that particular data set is significant. And policy and practice tend to move quicker than academic publishing. So, as Steve said, it's often then about locating your work in around the bigger ideas that have got general relevance to broader focuses, and not getting too preoccupied about specific instances in terms of policy and practice that you might have been focusing on at that particular time. There are other ways to publish as well. I mean, we're talking about academic publishing, but this is where blogs and opinion pieces, become really relevant, because you can kind of bash those out fairly quickly, and then stick them on LinkedIn or get them on the sort of blog space or whatever, and they keep your work relevant and on the sort of button. You talk about the bigger ideas in your academic publishing. So,
yeah, good point.
Yeah, that's really helpful, and I loved your example because my thesis was based on further education.
Wonderful. Oh, you must get in touch with that. You probably are in touch with it. It's a very small field. I've just put an article in the chat. This was one that I wrote for my PhD pilot study. And so the data was about a change in Ofsted's inspection criteria. The framework changed in 2012. And it had changed again a year or two later, or maybe even back September, can't remember. It's still being cited now. And the reason is that the article is not about the policy change per se. It's more a theoretical contribution as to what that change meant about the relationship between the state and school leaders. So if you can abstract your analysis and the contribution and make your contribution theoretical, conceptual, then it will stay relevant. Any more questions? Well, I mean, let me say then, I mean, we're enormously honoured to have Peter Ribbins in the room. Peter, I mean, in your vast experience of publishing, is there anything that you think that Paul and I have missed and that you'd like to share with us?
No, I'm very grateful to you both. A couple of things, one of which, reflecting on 50 years of publishing, is it seemed to me the field went through a period in which the gap between submission and publication got longer and longer. And then with the RAEs, they got shorter for a bit. But talking to editors now, they're telling me that they're finding it increasingly difficult to actually get reviewers to do things. And that means that the length between when you put your initial submission in and when it gets published is getting longer. In my last two publications, they've both been almost a year between from when, and it's not that they wanted me to do a huge amount of revision on the thing, it's just taking much longer. So just to warn people that you're likely to have to wait from the point at which you initially make the publication to when it actually gets produced at the end of the day, and that can be a bit disconcerting, but I'm afraid it is the reality that I'm tending to find.
Thank you, Peter. That's an enormously helpful point to make.
Well, can I make just one other point while I remember?
Of course.
The question on whether you should try and publish on the PhD before you've actually produced a PhD, I think is a very interesting question. And there might be a whole variety. It's easy to get deflected if you spend too much time trying to actually produce. But on the other hand, it's my understanding that when it comes to the Viva, and the views of the examiners, especially the external examiners on this, it does give your PhD a credibility if you can actually point in your bibliography at the end to something you had published in one of the journals in the field. It means that those editors, anyway, think the quality is sufficiently high to publish. Just a point. Something I've always said to my students.
It's a very good point. I mean, this is part of the reason why we started seeing more journal format theses. But I mean, to be honest, we've since realized that they're not for everybody. The cognitive load of coming up with a contribution per analysis chapter is beyond the standard normally required for a PhD. And some people are fine with that. Some people, it's something they don't need.
Got another question, Steve, in the chat.
All right, good. Yes, if your article is rejected, do you have to reveal this when you submit to another journal? No.
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 Definitely not.
But just bear in mind, what you shouldn't do is submit the same article to 2 or 3 more journals simultaneously. That's different. So if it's rejected from one journal and you don't want to go back and try again, you're well within your rights to send it elsewhere, and you certainly don't have to reveal that to the journal editors as you do that. And in fact, some of the best papers that have been published are likely to have been rejected from other journals beforehand. So it's not necessarily a slice on a journal. It's just part of that article's journey, I suppose. So,
oh, definitely.
That's a good question. Thank you, Caroline.
Right, well, we are approaching the end in any case now. So let's just do one last trawl for hands. Anybody? I'd hate to think that we didn't have an opportunity. But in that case, let me thank everybody for coming today. It's been wonderful to see you all. And I hope that some of the insights that we've shared have been useful. And do feel free to contact us at any time as well, if you have any follow-up questions.
Yeah, thank you also to colleagues at Belmas for helping us to organise the event. If any of you are members of Belmas or you're interested in Belmas, do please go and take a look at the website. We'd love to have you as a member of our society, and hope to see you all again very soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.